Again, thank you very much for joining us again today. I say again because we were fortunate to have two slots today. We're doing two Climate Matters shows, but tomorrow we're taking off. Last day of the COP. This is Climate Matters, a talk show coming to you live from the UN climate negotiations in Paris, France. My name is Stuart Scott. I'm your host. There we go. So we are at the Conference of Parties, the 21st Conference of Parties. We've been at this for 22 years. Actually, 1992 is when this started. So we've been at it for a while. I'm not sure how far we've come, but we'll see tomorrow evening what kind of agreement the diplomats come up with. Now, this is my email address. If anyone would like to get in touch, either from the audience or from the audience on the internet and the afterplays that this will receive. There we go. So our web presence is climatematters.tv. And here are some hashtags that we would appreciate your using if you are tweeting or using Instagram. Okay. Now, our guests today, we have with us, right next to me, Reverend Rowan Williams, who was formerly the Archbishop, or he's Archbishop Emeritus of Canterbury, the primate of the Church of England. And he is now the Master of Magdalene College at Cambridge University, one of his many responsibilities. And perhaps he'll discuss a few of the other hats that he sometimes wears. Here's an image of Reverend Williams off of our website. He is one of our founding members of the United Planet Faith and Science Initiative, which is an attempt to bring the consensus of all religions and science together to bring that consensus to bear on the urgency of addressing climate change with resolute, rapid action. Our next guest is Archbishop Seraphim Kikotis. He is the Metropolitan of the Archdiocese of Zimbabwe, and this is part of the Greek Orthodox Patriarchate of Alexandria and all Africa. Thank you for joining us today. And here is an image of Archbishop Seraphim from another time he was speaking at the climate negotiations. I could not find a suitable one of him himself. He's a very gregarious person. He likes to be taken in a photo with other individuals. Very interesting that he doesn't want to stand alone. He wants to be with people, and that's one of his qualities, one of his very strong qualities. He's open-hearted. And then our final guest with us today is Dr. Salumil Huq. Excuse me. I've pronounced it right and wrong in the past, so I hope I got it right this time. And he was a lead author on two of the IPCC reports. Perhaps you'll discuss that with us a little bit in a moment. And he's on the boards or directors or senior fellows of several organizations, all around climate and adaptation, especially adaptation of threatened populations. You yourself are originally Bangladeshi, is that correct? And we know that Bangladesh is one of the on the leading edge, the bleeding edge of the climate change catastrophe that's occurring right now. And here's the image of Dr. Huq again. Wanted to enrich our introduction slides a little bit. Now, we will have today, I will read a special message that was written for us by His All Holiness Patriarch Bartholomew of the Eastern Orthodox Church. This is the Green Patriarch. He is known for having been very, very loudly messaging about our need to take care of the earth for many, many years. And here's an image I gleaned from the internet of the patriarch with the Pope. Now, the two churches divided in a schism perhaps 1,000 years ago, and it's wonderful to see that there's a rapprochement that's occurring between the two churches. Today's topic, COP21 as a conference of peace, and we'll use that as the seed for our discussion. So first, if I may, Reverend Williams, can you speak to that? How is climate change a matter of war and peace?
Thank you. It seems to me that we face, at the moment, any number of interlocking global crises. And the crisis of resource, represented by climate change, the crisis of access to usable agricultural land, secure living space, clean water, and so forth, that is going to be one of the major sources of conflict in the next half-century or more, unless we address as a matter of real urgency the issues and the demands that are in front of this conference this week. In other words, we're not faced with a choice between a couple of good causes. Either we interest ourselves in environment, or we interest ourselves in peacemaking, or perhaps we interest ourselves in development. These are all locked tightly together. And to my mind, it is essential that we understand that interconnectedness. But to understand that is also to understand that we need a basic shift in our attitude to growth and prosperity. The myth that we are capable as a human race of endless economic expansion is exactly that. It's a myth, and it's a deeply dangerous one, and it's going to be a murderous one. We need to think again about what security and prosperity means without that aspiration to infinite and unstoppable economic growth. If we can tackle that basic attitude, then we may be able to tackle some of the practical questions that confront us. It's been said, and I think it's probably worth saying again, that in human terms, the security of any person or any nation is bound up with the security of its neighbor. The earth is our neighbor. Without the security of the environment, there's no human security. There's no peace. There's no stability and confidence that we have access to what we need to live well. And it's in that context that I want to connect these issues as tightly as possible together.
Thank you. You said something very, very eloquently that I have been trying for several years now to say. So I will mention that we are using these Climate Matters shows as feed into a film that we'll be making, and I'm sure that that part of your speech today will make the cut, because I like to say, for my money, because it's built into the language, it's built into the bottom line. The way the money and economic system have worked humanity, money runs humanity, not the other way around. Mm-hmm. So we are victims of this vast labyrinth of law and belief and action called money and growth economics. It's not the only form of economics available, and we'll get to that in a little bit later.
And there is, of course, research going forward at the moment. The Centre for Sustainable Development in the UK, Professor Tim Jackson, and the work that's being done by him and his colleagues in setting up a Centre for the Understanding of Sustainable Prosperity. There are a number of initiatives going forward in the next 6 months, which will be looking very closely at precisely this issue.
I have had interaction with Tim Jackson, and he is he's an ecological economist, and I'll be getting to that a little bit later in our program. So if we can move on to Archbishop Seraphim.
Thank you very much. It's the first time, I think, to have in a high-level leadership from the Christianity The day before yesterday, Cardinal Tusk from the Holy See, and today the Emeritus Archbishop of Canterbury, Rowan Williams. I remember him as a lecturer in Oxford 30 years ago, and he was worried about not only his students or the people in Britain, but for the whole humanity. And this is, I think, what we need to do today. And the message of the Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomeus emphasize this unique historical moment we have. If in the past we fail as international community to introduce strong policies to protect the humanity and the planet, it's the right time now. And I can see that climate change crisis unite also Christianity. After the announcement of the encyclical letter on ecology of the Holy Father, the two leaders of the Anglican Communion came together with a common statement, the Archbishop of Canterbury and the Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomeus, to support. And we saw similar meetings and announcements by other faith communities. So our planet is not negotiable. This is the message. But when we're talking about this event, conference on peaceful coexistence, to be realistic and fair, we have to speak also about restoration of justice. Without justice, we cannot enjoy peaceful coexistence. And wherever there is violation of human rights, unfortunately, violence brings violence. I remember His Grace when he visited a couple of years ago, 3 years ago, Africa, and he tried how to restore peace even between churches and between people. And when there was this restoration of justice, there was also peaceful coexistence for all of us. So Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomeus emphasized also the chasm between poor and rich, and a criteria that we introduce right policies to protect the planet and the humanity is also when we finish poverty and when we feel that the sufferings of the people are our sufferings. And the victims today are the ones who need protection, and the ones who they don't use wars in conflicts are the number one victims, children and women.
Thank you very much. And I think this is an appropriate time to read some of the message from Patriarch Bartholomew. Now, I will read a few of the paragraphs. It's 2 sides of a page. It's not overly long, but we have only a very brief time on stage today. This will be available for anyone who wants to write to me. I can send you it in a PDF. It's called A Unique Moment in History by His All Holiness Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew. As the world's expectations rise, our prayer is that political leadership will also rise to the occasion. From November 30 to December 11, 2015, the COP21 meeting in Paris is a unique historical moment, a critical opportunity to make the right choice. Political leaders may and should broker an agreement, but our planet is not negotiable. In recent decades, the world has witnessed alarming ecological degradation, increasing failure to implement environmental policies, as well as an ever-widening and scandalous gap between rich, predominantly of the North and West, and poor, predominantly of the South and East. As we have repeatedly emphasized, these vital challenges are not primarily political or economic. They are profoundly spiritual and ethical. Our deep-felt conviction is that all of us, as citizens of this delicate planet that we cherish and share, all of us are involved in this crisis. No single region or nation can be blamed for its cause, just as no single institution or discipline can resolve the crisis. We are all in the same boat. We are all called to care. We are all obliged to respond. Now, those were the first 3 paragraphs. The document goes on at the same level of intensity, and I encourage you to write to me afterwards to obtain one. It will be on our website, climatematters.tv, in a couple of days. Now, I want to take a moment for something we do in these Climate Matters shows once in a while, a non-commercial break. In the metaphor of a television show, which will bring you many commercial breaks trying to sell you things, what I'm going to indicate to you as a pitch, shall we call it? I come from New York. It's a pitch. It's not trying to sell you anything. In particular, one of my projects for the past 3 years has been to try to obtain a Nobel Peace Prize for sustainable development. Not the kind of sustainable development that has been co-opted by some growth economists and turned into sustainable growth, which is an oxymoron, but truly sustainable development, the kind that Tim Jackson is researching and teaching about. This is the very simple to remember or record website, np4sd.org. Nobel Prize for Sustainable Development. And yes, get out your cameras and take a photograph of that. And I'll just show you very briefly who the 3 candidates are this year. First, an organization, the Club of Rome. They brought out a study called The Limits to Growth in 1972 that was really one of the foundations of the domain of sustainable development. Second, Dr. Herman Daly, who's credited as the grandfather of the ecological economics system, which is a viable alternative. Viable alternative. Growth economics is not viable. It is 2 modalities to growth economics. Either you expand exponentially or it collapses. There is no room for slowing. There is no room for stability. And, oh, I'm sorry, I pressed once too quickly. I cannot avoid mentioning Pope Francis, who has for the past year or 2 been really, I want to say hammering. He's been repeating over and over that we need to look at our economic system if we want to avoid the tragedy that is appearing on the horizon. Now let's get back to our discussion. And if I may, I'd like to ask you, may I call you Salimul?
Yes, please, Salim.
Okay, Salim. Okay, would you please answer that question, the relationship between this COP and war or peace?
Well, I make the analogy, thank you very much, Stuart and Excellencies. I make the analogy of the climate change problem being a planetary crisis in which all nations of the world need to come together. I'll use the war analogy first and then the peace analogy after that, to fight a war against the climate. And the leaders who are assembled here are not discussing, arguing, or dividing things between the countries. It's about the whole planet, 7 billion people on the planet, and they are making decisions for all of us in terms of what we are going to leave behind for our children and our grandchildren. They can either leave a very devastated world, we're headed for well over 3 degrees temperature rise at the moment, or they can take it down to a tolerable level of 1.5 degrees temperature rise, which is what the vulnerable countries are demanding here. And if we want peace, then I think we need the 1.5 degree temperature rise. If we don't have that, then we will have unrest, insecurity, millions of people having to be displaced and move, and almost unimaginable scenarios playing out, which we want to avoid. So it's the avoidance of those kinds of disruptions globally that the leaders in the next few hours are going to have to make a decision on. And I am extremely hopeful that they'll make the right decision. Now, 1.5 degree temperature rise is a very, very difficult thing to achieve. We don't deny the difficulty of it, but we believe it's the right goal to have. And what they need to be doing here is the morally correct decision. And then all else will follow in terms of what needs to be done. But if they make a decision here on the basis of pragmatism, on, we can't do it, it's just too difficult.
Economics,
it's too expensive, then that will be a very, very bad decision to be making on behalf of all of us on planet Earth, which is the decision that they are making.
I personally have a very jaundiced view of the negotiations, where I see nations as quibbling over economic advantage. We don't want our economy to suffer. I know a colleague of mine interviewed a minister from Canada. I don't want to single out one nation. There's many politicians who are caught in the same bind, and Canada's pronouncement is, we're back. Okay, with the new government, they're back in the environmental camp. They're back with the program, except on the tar sands, which they say is required. We need the tar sands for our economy. It's unfortunate, but apparently economics still trumps survival. And the one exception I will take with what you said was that I don't believe that it's a problem for our children and grandchildren. I think that's a misnomer. It's a misperception that is allowing people to defer, because there are changes going on in the Arctic, in particular a release of methane that is underway, which could bring the whole shooting match forward by several decades. If we experience a methane burp, it's being called, then we are looking at a rapid heating of the planet. And this is not even factored into the IPCC report, I'm told, because the science is too new. So there's a wild card on the table. There's a joker on the table that is not even being considered across the hall. It's a very dangerous situation.
The patriarch says in his statement that this is fundamentally a spiritual question. And I think that for almost anybody from the historic faith communities, one of the most central spiritual questions there is do we think of our environment as something we possess or something we inhabit and share? And those are the two models, possession or sharing. Possession keeps coming back. And the trouble is, I think, with governments now arguing over their status and their security in relation to one another, the very problem which creates the environmental crisis in the first place is being replayed in terms of international relations, people clinging on to advantage and silencing the voices of those who are most affected by it. And it seems to me that that central spiritual issue, do we think of our relation as possessing or as sharing, that is the pivot of so much here.
I'd like to pick one word from that brilliant statement you just made, the word clinging, which conjured up an image. I've been saying lately that we are caught in the monkey trap. The monkey trap is the heavy glass jar in the jungle with nuts in it and hunters waiting in the forest. And when the monkey puts his hand in and grabs the nuts, the hunters run out of the forest, charge the monkey. But the monkey is unable cognitively to realize he has to release the nuts in order to live. And so the hunters catch up and kill the monkey. We are caught with our hands in the cookie jar, but it's money in the cookie jar. We are clinging to money at our own peril. This is a message that needs to get to the bankers of Earth, that needs to get to the major corporations of Earth, that the game is close to over.
The message of the World Council of Churches since the last century was to realize that we live in a common house which is not reliable, is under the threat of collapse. So we are talking now how to rebuild this common house we live, all of us.
Thank you.
And what we need is what His grace emphasized in the beginning. If we started thinking in the perspective of the eternity, but also as though we are going to live tomorrow from this world. So we are going to protect not only ourselves, but also the future generations.
And again, if I may select one word that stood out amongst all the words you used, rebuild. Because we are no longer simply trying to preserve. We have already damaged our home severely. We need to rebuild our home. Now, as a scientist, Can you address that point of how do we rebuild our home? How do we put things back in balance?
I think the scientific evidence is still on our side. We can do it. It's going to be very difficult to do. So there are three elements to what we need to do. Firstly, we have to wean ourselves off the use of fossil fuels as rapidly as possible. And many of the interests that you find in these negotiations that are trying to prevent that are countries that are dependent on fossil fuels. I won't name them. Secondly, we need to find an alternative clean energy pathway, renewable energies being one of them, again, ramping that up as fast as possible. But I would say even more important in those two elements is we need to be expressing solidarity with each other as human beings on planet Earth. This is a planetary problem of which we are now citizens of planet Earth and not citizens of the UK, Bangladesh, Greece, or whatever country we happen to be, because that's immaterial to this particular problem.
Now, I see we've been joined by a member of the Secretariat. Mr. Nuttall, did you come to receive the? Oh, okay. We were expecting Daniel Violetti to come and actually receive the statement that Patriarch Bartholomew made. I thought perhaps he had asked you to come in his stead. We wanted Christiana Figueres to come, but she was unavailable. Obviously, she cannot be in many places at once, as she is called upon to be in these negotiations. I give her a wonderful salute from the heart for the hard work that she is trying to do. I call her the head cat herder. She's trying to herd 196 cats through a very, very narrow door. We have only a moment left, I believe. We're almost out of time, so I'm going to say that if anyone has questions, we will need to take questions in the hall so that we can stay on, not violate the Secretariat's calendar for this press conference room. So I want to thank you all for coming. Very, very nice turnout. I hope that my media advisory, along with these personages, are responsible for this turnout. And what you're all welcome to join us on the internet for Climate Matters, climatematters.tv, where the record of this show and our other shows here at COP21 in Paris will be forever permanently ensconced. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's the beginning, you embrace.